So we'll switch to chocolate.
Play a little bit of music as folks roll in.
I'll take you out downtown. I swear you'll never witness anything quite as fine.
Hello, hello, viewers, and welcome. I'll give you a few minutes to roll in. Welcome to our event tonight.
Where we stood on this hill, I used to think of you. The one day we get together, and here we
All right. Welcome, everyone, to Lost City Books, welcoming E A Aymar, J.J. Hensley, and Elizabeth Heiter to discuss They're Gone, a new thriller written by Ed himself. I'd like to introduce a few things before we get started, so just so you know where you are and who we have with us today. For those of you who might be new here, I'll tell you a little bit about Lost City Books. Lost City Books is owned by Adam, who is a veteran and dog lover, a longtime resident of DC, and an enthusiastic disseminator of books. Our close-knit team is a collection of some of DC's coolest kids. I hope that I am such a one. We have artists, educators, musicians, writers, and of course, avid readers, all coming together, enriching this unique environment. I'm your host. My name is Shady, and I'm so excited for our guests today. I will tell you a little bit about Ed Aymar. A respected and skilled veteran of the thriller community, E A Aymar has published his latest thriller, They're Gone, under the pseudonym E.A. Barris. Did I say that right, Ed?
Yeah, I made it up, so really any pronunciation works.
Great. His most recent thriller, The Unrepentant, was published in 2019 and is currently a 2020 nominee for the Anthony Award in the category of Best Paperback Original. His past thrillers include the novels and stories The Swamp Killers and The Night of the Flood, in which he served as co-editor and contributor. He has a monthly column in the Washington Independent Review of Books, is a former member of the National Board of the International Thriller Writers, and for years was the managing editor of The Thrill Begins, an online resource for debut and aspiring writers. He's also an active member of Crime Writers of Color, the Mystery Writers of America, and SinC. He also runs the Noir at the Bar series for Washington, D.C., and has hosted and spoken at a variety of crime fiction, writing, and publishing events nationwide. That is a robust resume there, Ed.
Thanks. Most of it's true.
I'll give our viewers a quick overview of what They're Gone is about. It was published in November 10th but with Crooked Lane Books, and is described as opening with a bang and never letting up. A quick look at the plot: two men from vastly different backgrounds are murdered one after the other on the same night in the same fashion, with 2 bullet wounds, one in the head, another in the heart. The 2 slangs send their wives on a desperate search for answers and a desperate attempt to save their families' lives. And I'm really excited to talk a little bit about this because it seems like it turns a couple of things on its head. Lastly, our 2 guests for the night: Elizabeth, is it Heiter or Heiter? I'm sorry.
Heiter.
Elizabeth Heiter likes her suspense to feature strong heroines, chilling villains, psychological twists, and a little bit of romance. I like that too. Her research has taken her into the minds of serial killers, through murder investigations, and into the FBI Academy's shooting range. Her novels have been published in more than a dozen countries and 8 languages. They've also been shortlisted for the Holt Medallion, National Reader's Choice, Daphne du Maurier Books and Booksellers' Best Awards, and won the RT Reviewer's Choice Award. J.J. Hensley is a former police officer and former special agent with the U.S. Secret Service. I feel like we're going to have a lot of fun talking about that too, J.J. Mr. Hensley is the author of the novels Resolve, Measure Twice, Chalk's Outline, Bolt Action Remedy, Record Scratch, Forgiveness Dies, and several shorter works. Lastly, a teeny bit about Crooked Lane Books. Crooked Lane Books was founded in 2014 to publish the highest quality crime fiction titles in both print and electronic editions. From editorial and production to promotion, distribution and sales, they are a house that focuses on working with their authors to reach readers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense. And with all of that long opening spiel said, I would love to welcome our guests for the night.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited about tonight's event. I've been yabbering about it on social media and mentioning how close I am to both JJ and Elizabeth, and also I'm huge fans of their writing and the research they do for their books. So I've been really looking forward to tonight.
Thank you, as have I. Can we take just a few moments to talk about how you know each other as artists and sort of what your connection is as writers?
Yeah, I'll start. We met. Liz is actually the very first friend I made in writing as a published professional writer. My debut year, I went to Thriller Fest, which is the annual conference for the international thriller writers. And Liz and I were both part of their debut authors program. So we met they take all the debut writers to a pizza party the night before, which now that I say that, I never realized sounds like the exact kind of thing I do with my 6-year-old. But we sat next to at the pizza party and made awkward conversation and never stopped. And it hasn't stopped being awkward.
Also true. Yeah, and it was my debut year as well. And Ed was one of the first people that I met at the conference too. So we've been friends since 2014.
And I think I got introduced to maybe both of you through another writer. Tom Sweterlick may have actually mentioned my name to Ed, and then Ed's shaking his head no.
You never said a thing.
Yeah, I actually didn't even know you were a writer until today. But congratulations on your book, I guess. Tom Sweterlick, another writer we know, introduced me, and I'd gone to Thriller Fest, and then he had raved about Ed and Elizabeth, and he was absolutely right about Elizabeth, and we got to know each other and started eventually working on various projects together, and kind of created a bond with a kind of a larger group of us as well. But and we've remained friends, and even though we're spread out throughout the country, with Ed being in the DC area, and I'm now in Georgia, and Elizabeth up in Michigan.
And we actually worked a couple of projects together as well. Some of the projects that were mentioned in Ed's bio that that Ed was the editor on. JJ and I also contributed short stories too. So that's been really nice to be able to continue our friendship and actually write together too.
Wonderful, thank you. So before we went on live, I found myself caught in the position of hanging out with three people who are actually friends. And in the crossfire of jokes, I found that you all have a lot of great chemistry. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation tonight. I would like to start by hearing a bit more about They're Gone and how it came to be, how it compares to some of your previous works, Ed.
Yeah, so I was at Printers Row, which is a book festival in Chicago that they hold annually. And I was talking to a friend of mine, Susanna Calkins, who writes, a terrific writer who does historical fiction. And she was starting a new series that was set in Capone, Chicago. And she was telling me that of this phrase that the newspapers had used around the time of the, was it Bloody Sunday, Valentine's Day, St. Valentine's Massacre, I think. And when Capone's gang assassinated all these men, and the paper referred to their widows as the bullet widows. And I was like, I love that phrase. And she's like, yeah, I saw it in a newspaper and it's not really widely known. And I was like, well, I've got it. I want that. Can I use it? And she said, yeah, sure. And then I emailed her afterwards and I was like, I'm really going to use this. I'm not just kidding. If you don't care. And she's like, I have no qualm with that. So the novel sprang from that, two women who were sort of brought together based on after the murders of their husbands to find out what happened. And then we didn't keep the title, which was the publisher's decision and probably the right one. I really liked the Bullet Widows and I still do, but They're Gone to me feels much more marketable and a little more, it seems to fit more in better with other novels on bookshelves. So I'm reluctantly fine with that. But
so it's free now, right?
That's
Is
JJ's.
that title available?
Yeah, it's fine. You get yours.
Yep.
So that's, and it was a little different. My last book, The Unrepentant, was, it was, when it came out in 2019, it was warmly received, which was nice. It was the first novel I'd written that had been in trade reviews, and it got good reviews, and I was happy with that. But it was also, those reviews came with notes about, it was a very violent book. And it was sort of like, it was almost like the reviews were like those medicine commercials where they're like, this medicine will help you. Side effects may include, and then it goes on and on. That's kind of how the book was, like, trigger warnings may include. I wanted to write something that had a much more commercial feel that could be a book club book, but was still very much my book. That still very much was what I wanted to write. And They're Gone is the result of that.
I would like to interject that Michelle Cullen comments that Bullet Wounds is a great title. I agree.
Yeah, I know. Someone can have it, I guess. It's fine.
You're going to see it on JJ's social media tomorrow that his next book's called The Bullet Widows.
Yep, patent pending.
So Ed, is that's the pure origin of this story is as sort of connecting to the Bullet Widows story and sort of bringing it into a modern era? Is that what you'd say?
Yeah, and it's really hard for me a lot of times to answer questions like that about origins, because I feel like so much happens in the creation of something that influences it. I wanted to write, the other thing that happened when I was writing The Unrepentant was it was a novel about sex trafficking, and I did a lot of research into sex trafficking, and I came out of that research with, I love being a guy. I enjoy it. It's great. It's so much easier. The low bar is extremely helpful. But I would say that I came out with a very unfavorable view of men through that research. And it was very hard for me to put a man in the role of a hero. In The Unrepentant, it's told through two perspectives. One was a man, but he was very much more of a sidekick character, and a little more comic relief. I wanted to write about two women, and from very different paths, and that's where Ceci and that's where Deb came from. But I really wanted to I was, worried about that, because there's a very fine line between, artistic expression and appropriation. And I wanted to make sure there are people better suited to tell that story than I am. I just wanted to tell the story as best as I could.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the research that went into researching these characters?
Yeah, most of the, with the research I had done in sex trafficking, that was really the most research that I ever did, aside from, for something I've written, aside from like my graduate thesis. With my other research, it's very much location based. So Ceci Castillo is a Baltimore bartender. She works in Fells Point, and I really wanted to get a sense. I studied Baltimore. I love that city, and I wanted people to feel like they were walking on the streets, that it was recognizable. I feel that one of the things that I always talk about whenever I have the chance to teach writing, or whenever I'm reading stories for submission or something for a anthology or something like that, or a contest, is the importance of location. Something I always stress, because location informs character so much. So my research for these two women really came from research into Virginia and Maryland, and how this area, Virginia, DC, and Maryland, really intersect culturally and socially. And you can drive from one city in Virginia to a city in Maryland and never leave a city or buildings in the background. But I wanted to write about how that informs people and what it means.
I finished your book yesterday, actually, and I thought it was interesting how you contrasted the two, the areas of Baltimore and DC, though. And having lived in the DC area, it was interesting because I had the same observations of the DC area, having moved there from Richmond, Virginia, where you mentioned, and you described it well with Baltimore. You gave it a feel, a tone, and everything. And then with DC, you explained how it didn't have that, where you weren't putting it down. You were just explaining that it didn't have that cultural feel to it, because it is, so many people aren't from DC. I lived there for years, and I don't know if I ever met anybody from DC. It's just everybody moves from other places.
And there's, that's one thing about this area that, I think a lot of times we look at it as like, it's partly because of the work in this area and how people come in and out, but there's other reasons for that too. And some are, I think, rooted in a little bit of race, and race separated the way it typically is in cities, by class. And I think in DC, especially given what what part of the city is, right, which is monuments there, it's never given, it's hard for the residents of the city to really establish their voice. I think, that's it. It's not, they're not, I think that opportunity has been lacking in a lot of, over time.
I would have to concur with that as a DC native, just sort of watching the city change, especially over the last couple of decades. I didn't get to finish your book yet, but I did really appreciate the native feeling of the setting and of the characters interacting with that setting.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm curious, Ed, for your research, because I've definitely written characters who have different identities in one way or another from me. Like what the process was like for you creating two women, like if your research was different or the beta readers you chose were different, or what that process was like for you. And I know your last book had a primary female character too, but just in general.
Yeah, it's a lot of that comes from, you know, I wanted to write these characters. I felt like I knew them, but I wanted, like I said, I wanted to tread cautiously. And one of the things that I'm really fortunate about is I don't use beta readers as much as I used to. I don't know if you guys still do. Because I know, Liz, you were really active in writing groups.
I do, especially for things like if I'm writing characters who are substantially different from me, and I can find beta readers who represent like that identity or that experience, who can give me, you know, their personal reflections on what the experience has been like for them. And I do have a core group of writers who I will sometimes ask to read the book for me before I turn it into an editor too.
Yeah, I was very concerned about that. And I'm fortunate because my agent and my editor and some of the people that all the people that I've shared early versions of my work with are all very strong, very outspoken women who are not afraid to call me out on my BS. So if I screw something up, they'll let me know. And I need that. You know, the best edit I can get that I consider the strongest one is a little note that says, like, I don't think I would do this. And I'm like, okay, I need to know that. You know, that is, I glue myself to that kind of insight, because that is fundamental to what I want to do. And it informs me about other things, about character. I mean, I really want to make sure that you get these characters right. And I think a lot of male writers, when they're writing women, try to do too much. You know, I think they try to describe like the female experience, and they try to get like, you know, really insightful, and I think they want to be appreciated for that, and they always fuck it up. Can we swear?
Too late.
They always fuck it up. And I didn't want to do that, you know, so I didn't want to try and, you know, male writers will always throw in stuff that women writers won't when they're writing about female characters. And you see those were the kind of errors I wanted to avoid.
I don't know if you've seen this trend on the internet, but it's popped up in different YouTube videos and stuff. It's people reading men writing women, and some of the absurd kind of.
Yeah, those are great.
Yeah.
Pretty
I'm familiar. That was part of my research. Like, have I done this? No.
I made sure I wasn't mentioned. I was just making sure it was none of my work. Like, okay, are those any of my characters? No. Okay, thank God.
Speaking of your work, though, I would like to take a few minutes to talk about each of your upcoming publications that you're working on or that are coming out soon.
No, go ahead, Liz.
Oh, sure. So I write both psychological suspense and romantic suspense. So I'm currently in the middle of writing a new thriller, which is set in Detroit, and I'm really excited about hoping to finish in the next month or two, at least the first draft. And in 2021, I have 3 romantic suspense books coming out in my Canine Alaska series. So all law enforcement characters, at least in one of the primary roles, and dogs, which is always fun, dealing with issues ranging from a character who was kidnapped as a child and is returning because the person who kidnapped her has escaped and is doing it again, to a woman who's facing stalking, to a series of bombings that's connected to my police chief's past and her husband's death many years before.
We all we have a really close group of friends, a larger group, maybe about 10 to 12 writers, and we all want to, and JJ and Liz and I are part of this, and we all want to grow up to be Liz, because nobody is more Elizabeth, because nobody is more
Prolific.
Organized and meticulous and prolific with her writing.
All those books on the bookshelf behind her, she wrote those this year. If as soon as we get off here, she'll probably write a book and then have it ready tomorrow. It's incredible.
A quick nightcap of an entire book.
No, she'll have a series done by the end of the week. It's ridiculous.
So Liz, you did mention though you're working on one, but is that a standalone?
A standalone thriller, yes, which I'm really excited about. So
Is it contracted or is it?
it is not contracted because it's a book I'm planning to go wide with, which is actually why I'm kind of writing the full thing and don't have a set deadline at this point.
Gotcha.
But
How
go
cool.
within 2 months to finish the first draft and then get it on submission in a couple months after that.
What about you, JJ?
I just had, I don't have a bookshelf. I'm here at the Four Seasons storage closet. I just had a book come out October, The Better of the Bad. It's the fourth in a series dealing with a private investigator named Trevor Galloway. And it's through Down and Out Books. And he is a former Pittsburgh narcotics detective. And he's become a private investigator. He has some PTSD issues. So he sees the occasional hallucination, which creates some issues because he's got some people after him. He never knows who's real, who's not. This particular book, he has relocated to Savannah, and a local politician has asked him to look into a series of murders. There's somebody who the press has called the 911 killer, who has been calling the communication center for the Savannah area, and because he's been relocated to Savannah, Georgia, and he's calling them at 9:11 p.m. and dialing 911, and he is then announcing the address, and he's killed somebody at that address, and it's somebody who is associated with the dispatchers in the room at the communication center. So obviously the tension in the dispatch center is extremely high because they know somebody is likely to be killed there. Dispatchers are quitting left and right, which is affecting response times across the town. So I ended up doing quite a bit of research on just the local area here, as far as the political establishment and the local PDs and communication center and everything. So, and I know we'll probably get into this, but just because my background's in law enforcement doesn't mean you don't have to do research. So that was a fun book to write because I got to do a lot of research on this one in particular, on some little nuances that were specific to the locality.
That actually leads me into a question for all three of you about the setting and about the research that goes into creating a thriller. For example, we talked a little bit about the Fells Point in Baltimore and the setting and political setting in Savannah. How would you describe the process of sort of collecting that essence of a place and distilling it into a setting for a thriller and sort of transforming the lens, looking at that space?
I mean, for me, I pick places that have a feel to it. I mean, I've only written one book where I completely made a town up. I made a town up in Bold Action Remedy. I made a town up in central Pennsylvania. It could have been any small town in central Pennsylvania, which I'm familiar with, so I gave it a feel like that. Every other place, I pick places that I can sense there's a vibe to it. There's a feel. There's the populace has a certain mentality, a certain attitude, whether it's Pittsburgh. I've done stories in Richmond, Virginia, and now I've done Savannah. There's something to it that is almost tangible in the air. And to me, the place becomes its own, the setting is almost its own character. And it drives some of the characters' actions. That's how important the setting is to me. I really put a lot of thought into the setting. For the book that I'm currently working on, I had my family and I had taken a trip to St. Augustine, Florida, and I was so struck by that town. I was like, I've got to come back here, do a little bit more research, and I'm going to at least set part of a book here. I can get hit just by taking a trip and seeing the place and be like, I can feel it. It's in the air. And there's something about the place, the history, the architecture. So there's something, and then the way that the people are interacting, that'll grab me, and I'll be like, that this is a setting that I need. There's stories to be told here.
Yeah.
I find. Oh, go ahead, Liz.
I was going to say I'm similar to JJ. I've done some places that were made up, and in those cases, I based them on similar cities that I've seen, similar cities in the same geographical area, and I've written some in places that do exist. I usually base them on places I've been to, so that I don't have to try and do a lot of research on like Google Maps and getting into like the street level views. Although I have done that really specifically for a book when I was going to bomb a federal building. And so my search engine history is probably real concerning, that I was looking up this really specific federal building in great detail, and then details about bomb making. But typically when I'm researching a place, like right now, I've done a lot of research for Detroit, and that involves like researching the historical, like everything from the 1700s up until now, to get the context of it, to like what is the makeup of the city, where do different groups live, and looking at things like I actually have made a bunch of trips. I grew up near Detroit, so I'm really familiar with the city, but I don't live there. So I've gone downtown Detroit with my uncle was one of them, who did grow up there, and he's driven me all around, and I've taken tons of pictures and taken tons of notes with all these little details that I want to fit into the storyline, so that it feels real to people who do live there, and not just one particular person's experience either. Trying to show what it's like in different areas of the city, for example, depending where, because my book takes place in multiple areas across the city, and trying to show like who would be in those areas, what would they be doing, what time of day is it going to be empty versus crowded, all those little details that make it feel real when you get into the story. I love research, so it's a lot of fun.
I tend to find, it's so subjective, right? Because I'm with JJ and with you, Liz. I mean, I need a vibe. I need a feeling that propels me, to a certain location. And, and you sort of can inadvertently insult people, because like, I don't find suburbs particularly evocative or provocative, and I live in Northern Virginia, which is like a gigantic suburb. And everybody I know in Northern Virginia is like, no, this is, history and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, we're talking outside of Rite Aid, man. But it's, I can, so it's very subjective. And I realize that what's going to strike me is unique and is independent to me. But I find that what really has to work, and for years why I wrote about Baltimore, is that I need an area that can fit two certain dynamics for me. One is I can imagine violence there, or crime, and the other is in daylight hours or in another perspective, it almost has to have a lovely kind of romantic feel, sort of like a museum. Museums give me that sense, where it's kind of creepy because so you hear those empty footsteps walking, dong, dong, and then, but there's this beauty around you, but it's kind of terrifying to think about being there alone at night with Baltimore for me is that. It's this Gothic kind of architecture and city that that can be a beautiful place to like visit, but it also has its hidden darker side.
And kind of lending to how subjective it is, I'm sure we've all had readers approach us and they're like, where you should set a book, and then they tell you where you should set a book, and it's always somewhere where they live or somewhere. And it's like, you should set a book in Berryville, Virginia. I don't want to set a book in Berryville, Virginia. No, you should. Okay, I'll put that in my notes. I'm not setting a book in Berryville, Virginia. So,
you should though.
I've been there. I arrested a counterfeiter in Berryville, Virginia. But I'm not setting a book in Berryville, Virginia.
The Bullet Widows can be set there.
That'll be, the title will be on my book, but I am not setting it in Berryville, Virginia. Counterfeiting,
that's so cute. That's like antiquated. I'm almost happy people are still doing that.
It's my favorite crime. My favorite crime. It's so old school.
If there are any Berryvillians watching right now, I offer our sincere apologies on behalf of Lost City Books.
It's a beautiful place.
You've
It's a-
lost that demographic,
I'm
JJ.
not- you can't set books where the protagonist chases the bad guy for 2 blocks and that's the whole city.
Yeah.
I can't. It's
More of
boring.
that attitude. I'll take a second to remind our viewers really quick that if you have questions for the authors at the end of this event, you can type them into the comments section. I see a few are starting to accumulate.
It's the Berryville crowd. Here they come.
Oh, the Berryville crowd is going to have some words for you, JJ. I'm so sorry. But as we're kind of moving on in time, I know that the 3 of you have a bit of a discussion prepared specifically about some of the elements of your work, talking about crime fiction and law enforcement representation and how those things have shifted over time. So I would love to sort of delve into that. I'm sure many of our viewers are really curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons. So when I started thinking about promoting They're Gone, I didn't want to have a whole bunch of events where I talked about myself in the book. I did actually want to do that, but I thought it would be interesting to have that event tied with something else. And this is a topic that's really interested me, especially given 2020 and law enforcement, and especially given what both of you do, which is you both write law enforcement and you study it, but you take very nuanced approaches to it. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. I wanted to ask first, who are some writers today who you feel portray law enforcement accurately? You can't name each other.
Oh.
Well,
Okay,
I was going to actually say the first one I was going to say is JJ, because I think anytime you have someone who's worked in law enforcement, who's then writing about law enforcement, there's going to be more accuracy. And I know JJ talked about just because he's worked in law enforcement doesn't mean he can write types of law enforcement that he has not personally done. Doesn't mean he doesn't have to do the research. But I think what it does is informs certain characters in playing roles that he has done, like he's worked as a police officer, but also knowing what kinds of things he needs to know. Because I think one of the things that I've personally found in research is the places where I stumble are not necessarily the places where I've done a lot of research and I've just missed something. It's the places where I make assumptions because it seems logical. And those are the things that when I have a law enforcement, someone with a law enforcement background who's doing the job that I'm writing about, read it, they call out, yeah, we wouldn't actually do this, and here's why. And the only times I've ever had that happen are things that I just assumed because it seems logical that you could do that. So I think JJ is a good example of someone who writes law enforcement characters really accurately and really well. Another one I will say is Lisa Gardner. I think she really does her research on law enforcement, and it feels really realistic to me.
Yeah, and thank you, Liz. And I would say present company excluded, since Ed messed that up. I would say John Verdon is a writer who he kind of goes under the radar, and it's not his background, but he has done enough research that he does it very well. He has a good series with a detective named Dave Gurney, who's a retired New York detective, and he does a very good job with his research, and he gets it right to a large extent. Going into feeding off what Liz was saying with the difficulties of the research, there are certain things that the people who are good at the research, like Liz, they go in and they do the right things as far as the research goes. They go online, or they take it a step further and they do what they need to do, and that's actually go talk to the people who are in law enforcement and in the business, and they say, okay, can you read this for me, or what did I get wrong? One of the things that you'll always hear that people get wrong are weapons. That you'll hear that over and over again. That gun doesn't have a safety. You're not gonna, you're always having cops chamber around into the weapon. It's already chambered. So stop doing that. We're so influenced by what we see on TV that we assume it's true. So that's one of the things. But the one thing that is so hard to research, and we miss it all the time, and it changes by geography and by jurisdiction, is jargon. It's the little things. It's the way that the cops are talking to each other. Sometimes it's big things. Sometimes it's across geography. Like, and we've gotten this from TV where FBI agents will be in the same building together, and they're saying, Agent Smith, this is Agent Johnson. Agent Johnson, this is Agent Jones. Who talks like that? They're coworkers. They're talking to each other. Accountants don't do that. They don't say senior accountant Smith, this is senior accountant Jones. They're introducing each other by first names. But this is what they do in TV. So this is what we do in books. They call each other agent and detective and officer. It's not that way in law enforcement. They're coworkers. They talk to each other by first name, just like everybody else. But there's little things like the jargon, and I had to do it when I was writing a story, and I was mentioning Baltimore actually for one of my characters, Cypress Keller. He's in my book Resolve and Chalk's Outline. I had to contact a guy who was Baltimore PD and say, because I was saying BPD instead of Baltimore PD. I was like, I don't know if they actually do that. I don't know if they actually ever say BPD. And he had to confirm from me that they do say BPD. It's little things like that. The radio traffic. It's the little things as far as just the way that they talk to each other and the little interactions that it's more hard to research because you can't find that readily available online. And you actually have to find somebody who's done the job and done it recently, because things change. When I worked patrol as an officer in Virginia many years ago, and I don't look that old, but we didn't have computers in cars and nobody carried tasers, and things change. You have to do your research.
So there's another aspect to that, right, about accuracy and portrayal, which is that, crime fiction often lionizes, I think I'm saying that right, law enforcement, to a fault. Would you agree? That's at least my take. Would you agree with that? And why do you think that is?
I don't know if it lionizes. I would say it's not accurate. So I would say it either lionizes or demonizes. I just say we don't do justice to law enforcement either way. And I'm not a police apologist. Anybody who follows me on social media knows that I'm very critical of certain aspects of the police, and I'm a big advocate of police reform and whatnot. So I'm not saying that we need to, hold law enforcement on a pedestal, and in crime fiction in particular, we need to lionize them. But I don't think we portray it accurately. It's like any other profession where there's going to be gray areas. There's going to be, these good cops, there's going to be bad cops. There's systematic problems with racism. These things exist, and we need to acknowledge that in crime fiction and in all aspects of life. So I don't know how Liz feels about that as far as the lionization or demonization of law enforcement in fiction.
Yeah, I think that there's obviously a large spectrum. So I would say though that I think we do see a lot of lionization of law enforcement. And I think that the reason is kind of a logical one, in that we're writing crime fiction. And so at the center of the story is some kind of crime. And the most logical person to be solving the crime and solving the mystery is someone who has access and resources and a reason to be solving the crime. And that's someone in law enforcement. And even though, definitely in crime fiction, we have unreliable narrators, we have unlikable protagonists, but I think by and large, we have characters who are, that we want to root for, who are ultimately good characters. And so I think that when we have law enforcement in that protagonist role, sometimes it can feel maybe not as nuanced as it should, and not necessarily all through the protagonist, because I do think that, like any profession, any other profession, you're going to have a range of people doing it. You're going to have people who are really doing it for the right reasons and doing a good job, people who are doing it because they want to protect others. And then you're going to have people on the other end of the spectrum who I think many of them are interested in the power of it and who are not necessarily doing it for the right reasons, and that you're seeing a lot of problems. And I think sometimes that's where the nuance is lost, is that when your protagonist is law enforcement and your protagonist is ultimately good, then sometimes some of those other pieces fall away and you lose sight of some of the nuance that I think needs to be in crime fiction. Some of those issues seem like they're more invisible, and they shouldn't.
I do think that's the key, is who's your protagonist, because a lot of people, if their protagonist is not law enforcement, there's a tendency to make sure that the law enforcement characters that do show up in the book are either apathetic, corrupt, or incompetent, because otherwise, why does your protagonist have to do anything? Because law enforcement would be doing it. They can just call 911 and that would be the end of the book, which is just a terrible book.
You know, Liz, you brought up something interesting. I wasn't listening when you were talking, JJ, but Liz, you brought up something that I thought was really interesting, which is, the nuance of the characters. And this isn't on the questions that I sent you guys, so I'm sorry, I'm deviating already. But it seems like more, and no offense to JJ or myself for that matter, but it seems like more males are write police procedurals, say, or more male writers are writing those kind of books, and the characters don't tend to be as nuanced. And I'm thinking about that in relation to something that's come up over the past couple of years, which is, it's a topic that hits a lot of women writers, which is, should you make your characters likable? Likable female characters, the complicated female character. And I wonder if that's part of it, that we're not seeing maybe a lot of introspective characters, even for that matter, in those books, because it's not the writer's focus.
Yeah, and I think with crime fiction, I do think the best crime fiction does take a nuanced approach and shows you some of these issues in the story. I always say that I think the best fiction doesn't just entertain, it also informs. And I think talking about a lot of these social issues, that's true. I do think that in crime fiction, because you have so much happening in a plot where you're trying to unravel a mystery and you have all of these red herrings and all of these clues, that it can be easy to write characters who are pretty one-dimensional, who don't have any growth over the course of the book. And if you do have characters who grow, sometimes it's only the main character, and your secondary characters really are pretty static, and they're there as background or to cause problems or to be, a helper character or something like that. So I would agree with that. I think that adding more nuance to the characters as a whole in the story can bring in some of those issues that we're wanting to talk about, that can sometimes be challenging when you're thinking about, oh, maybe you do want to write a protagonist who's inherently good, even if they have growth, even if they, they are nuanced and they're not perfect, which they shouldn't be. I do like to write characters who you want to root for as my protagonist. It's not necessarily characters who you really don't like, but you want to still figure out the mystery.
Do you think have issues in 2020 changed your approach to how you're going to write characters or issues in law enforcement?
Not for me. I've always at least acknowledged social issues and not buried readers in them, but acknowledged them and tried to address them. I know there are people who say, hey, novels are escapism, and readers don't want that. They don't want, but to me, to be honest to the work and to be honest to what I want to do, I at least have to acknowledge there are certain aspects to our lives that need to be reflected in it if we're going to make the books as authentic as possible. I try to make the characters as authentic as possible. I try to put them in realistic situations as much as I can. You got to reflect society as realistic as you can, and to do that, I think, escapism be damned, you have to at least show, hey, this is a reflection of society. If you're writing a contemporary book, this is the reflection of society as it exists today. And if you're writing something historical fiction, this is how it was at the time.
Although that's how it exists to you from your perspective.
And it's, yeah, sure, it's going to be, that person's perspective, and hopefully you're being open-minded enough that you are showing, hey, this is at least the viewpoint of more than one character. Maybe it's your protagonist, but then you're showing it through other eyes, through your other protagonist. Hopefully you don't have that many one-dimensional characters that are looking at it through a myopic scope.
Yeah, I would say my answer is similar to JJ's. I don't think necessarily that 2020 is going to drastically change how I approach writing and how I approach putting social issues into my stories. It's something that it's part of the reason that I write at all, is because I have something to say about social issues, about the status quo, about things that I'm passionate about that I feel are unjust around me. And I do think that readers, by and large, pick up stories because they want to be entertained, because they want to solve that mystery, because they want to go along for a journey. But I think that there's still a lot of opportunity to put in social issues into a story. And really, readers who pick up a book and they don't see any of those issues that we're experiencing, I think the books aren't going to feel real. They're not going to resonate in the same way, because it's going to feel like it's a made up land. It's not going to feel like, it's not going to feel contemporary. And I think that a lot of that, that process has to include things like doing the research, and not just around law enforcement, but also things like setting, and things like, the issues that you're talking about, how are they impacting disparate groups? And, what are the different perspectives on the same issue that we can show through the fiction? And, when you're talking about things like law enforcement, when we start looking at demographics of who's in law enforcement and what communities they're policing, where are there differences there that are going to lead to problems? I think showing some of that kind of stuff in the story can be subtle, and depending on the story, like depending on the plot, depending on the themes that you're talking about, some of these social issues are going to have more or less pages, depending on how much space you have to dedicate to them. But I think that anyone writing crime fiction today is going to put in something with social issues. I think you can't avoid it if you're writing about crime.
Shady, I didn't want to take too much with this discussion based off time. Are we fine, or are we?
We're great. I would like to hear more. I actually I wanted to interject with a small question of my own.
Yeah.
If that's all right. I'm hearing all three of you discussing sort of the archetypes that you work from, or that you're presented with when writing about law enforcement in crime fiction. And as someone who doesn't read a lot of crime fiction, but I'm exposed to crime fiction, or as you were saying, Ed, crime procedurals, I feel like I see two main archetypes. There's the infallible superhero cop who can't possibly be wrong no matter what he's doing. And then on the other hand, you have this gruesome villain who is flouting the law and the rules, but still both of those archetypes enjoy unfettered power within their positions. And I wonder what your thoughts are, all three of you, on sort of busting through those, clearly based on what you've said so far, false archetypes, and really making your characters, when you write about law enforcement, making them truer to life and more, even whether they're good or not good, whether they're protagonist or not. What are some of the tools that you use in your writing, or some of the approaches that humanize and the characters for you, and maybe divert from those two archetypes and describes a person doing a job?
Yeah, for me, that's a really good question, and it's better than the questions that I had. So thanks, Shady, for making me look bad at my event. No, I'm kidding. For me, there's, I couldn't agree more with your thoughts on the first archetype, the perfect hero, and I find that really troublesome. I find it's sort of what I feel like I've been writing against for a couple of years now. I don't like, Jack Bauer on 24, right? Because I always wonder, like, what does Jack Bauer do on like Saturday night? Like, that guy is just like a killing machine who, I can't imagine him. Like, he has these friends, and I'm like, why? what's possibly like nice or fun about you? You seem awful. And
He's a
he's
great
got,
interrogator. He asks a question, and then when they don't answer it, he asks it louder.
yeah.
Really.
My concern with those characters is that, you know, they're borderline. No, you're not borderline psychopathic. They are, you know, somewhat one-dimensional, and their approach is, I think, idolized. You know, it's very much the anti-hero that has become sort of a hero in America. And I find myself so irritated by that. You know, and writers who write that, and they tend to be dudes, tend to, you see them at conferences, and oh my God, I don't know who postures more, male crime fiction writers or first year rappers. Like, there is just like so much bravado there, and you're like, okay, settle down, dude. You sit all day and you read and you write. You're not that. Unless you're JJ, who was former Secret Service and could.
I literally go to crime fiction conferences with an earpiece and sunglasses on the whole time.
Yeah.
It's
So,
a lot of
but I feel like, you know, for me, writing the characters I do is a way for me to write outside of that, you know, to write and also for me, you know, crime fiction is a lot of violence. And when you look at violence the way I do, which is that it's unsettling and that it's a life-changing thing and that it's the kind of thing that scars you, then you're not going to approach it. And I'm not saying that there's not a place for cartoon violence and not a place for over-the-top explicit violence, but it's not what I want to do with my books right now. I want it to be unsettling, and I want it to be a little dismaying. But anyways, I'm sorry. Liz, JJ?
Go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. A perfect character doesn't interest me just because a perfect character is not anyone I know. I want to read about a character who I grew up over the course of the book, and I want to read about a character who's real, and that's what I want to write about as well. And I think the process for me of creating that kind of character is based both in research around, you know, what does it take to do the job that my character is going to do if you're talking about someone in law enforcement, and what might have led them to get into that kind of job. What is their approach going to be? Who's around them? And how does that skew their perspective? So for example, like I have 4 books in a series that I wrote about a biracial female FBI agent, and the FBI special agents are 83% white and also mostly male. And so that obviously is going to impact her experience in the FBI. And when I write any character, whether they're law enforcement or not, I think really hard about what made them the person they are. So I spend a lot of time doing character development that goes from really their childhood and think through what are the big events in their life that created the person that they are and gave them their perspective on life. Where did they live? What's their family experience? Have they been exposed to violence, and in what way? And I think that, you know, some of that stuff doesn't make it into the book, but those are the kinds of things that make characters feel real and make their motivations and their actions feel real as well and feel realistic, that given what we know about a particular person, yeah, they would behave in this way, or no, this feels really out of character.
That Profiler series, just for a plug, was so good. It's one of my favorite series from the people I know as writers or just writing generally. Hunted, Caged, Vanished, and
Hunted, Vanished, Seized, and Stalked. Yeah.
Seized and Stalked, Caged, Seized and Stalked, right.
And as far as what you were mentioning, Shady, about the characters, you know, all good and all bad, and there not being that gray area, that's actually what pushed me to start writing. Is back when I was living in the DC area, actually, my wife and I were big crime fiction readers, and we were going through a lot of books and audiobooks, and we were one of the things that we talked about that was really bothering us was that those protagonists that seemed to be invincible and did no wrong, and the villains that were just so evil, and that was what kind of inspired me to start writing. And because we, you know, as my wife and I were discussing, we're just like, that's just not real. That's not real life. And that's why almost all my protagonists are very, we'll call it morally ambiguous. There's definitely a gray area with them. And the bad guys, usually there's some sympathy that people feel for them, at least at some level. Even if they're pretty demented and there's something wrong with them, something triggered it in their past. There's some wiring that went wrong for a reason, so that at least people feel some level of empathy for them. So there's not this, oh well, it's just a hard, cold, serial killer, and that's all that, they need to be put down. And here comes our knight in shining armor to do it. I think that's been done and overdone. And again, it's not true to life. And that's we've had enough of that.
I would say too, I mean, Trevor Galloway, the character you wrote about, is one of the most interesting and flawed characters that I've come across.
Okay.
I mean, I really like him, and he, but I would never, ever want to be him.
No, and that was a tough one, because that series is 4 books long now, and that was one of those decisions that I had to decide whether I was going to leave him as a stagnant character where he's the same from book 1 to book 4, or let him evolve and change for 4 books. And I let him change, and so far the readers have been okay with that. They liked watching how the stories, life has changed him like it would a real person. Except for he's got bigger issues than most people do. So we lost your audio, Shady. You're on mute. That's something I would do.
I'm gonna give you all the opportunity to keep talking about this a little bit, but I want to remind our viewers that you can add some questions to the comment section of this live stream, so that you can ask these wonderful authors questions about their work or more about what we've just been discussing. I will convey one question from Karen Herman, who asks, what sources do you use for your research? And I think rather than earlier, we talked a bit about sort of the personal sources, the experiential sources that are a part of your research. But I'd be curious to find out, what kind of books you're poring over and that sort of thing.
One of my bookshelves, which is not behind me, is entirely filled with research books on a huge variety of topics. But when it comes to law enforcement, for research books, I really like law enforcement books written by people who actually did the job, because that tells you some of the nuances that JJ was talking about earlier, that you don't necessarily get when you're picking up a book about law enforcement by someone who's just done a lot of interviews. So I have a ton of those on my shelf. A lot of my favorite research is the hands-on research. So if you're a writer and you belong to writers organizations, there's a lot of opportunities to go and do things like, I've been to the Writers Police Academy, which is, it's really at a police academy, but it's geared toward writers. So you can go and walk through and practice how you're supposed to walk through a door if you're a police officer, how you're supposed to go upstairs so that you don't get shot. Do things like breach doorways if you were SWAT, or I've had the opportunity to go to the FBI field offices and the FBI Academy and fire their weapons and stuff like that. And a lot of those opportunities came through writers groups. Some of them are opportunities that come just because I know someone, or I know someone who knows somebody, and I reach out and say, hey, I'm a writer. I'm trying to portray this accurately. Can you help me? Can I do a ride along? Can I talk to someone who's doing the job? And the answer is almost always yes, because I think by and large, I found people who are doing a lot of these jobs want them to be portrayed accurately. And so they want to help you get the information to do it.
And I admit I am completely blessed in this way. Not only do I have a background in law enforcement, my day job, I work at a law enforcement academy. I work at a federal law enforcement academy. So if I have a question about explosives, I talk to somebody who works at ATF. If I have a question that deals with the Navy, I can talk to somebody at NCIS. I had a question in my last book about just what the latest method for bagging a knife that had been used in a murder. I talked to somebody who works in the forensics section over there. And they sent me pictures and showed me exactly how it's being done right now. So I have abundance of resources at my disposal. Sometimes I'll just say, hey, I'll put your name in the acknowledgments of the book, or in the case of my friend in the forensics department, I put his name in the book and then killed him.
You killed his character.
Sure.
A lot of the research I did for my last book informed this one, and part of that is because, like I mentioned, it was about sex trafficking, and that research really affected me. So I read everything I could on sex trafficking, and then I read everything I could about sex work, because what I found was the very necessary and the very visceral discussion and debate about sex work, whether it should be legalized or illegal. And I don't really have a stance in that. But there were so many arguments for both sides that I really wasn't aware of, that they've continued to inform me. And the woman I talked with, who were either active or formerly active in the sex trade, or who had escaped from being trafficked, really shed a light on that as well. I think that there'll probably be at least a couple more books where that factors in before I write it out of my system.
And I think that's one of the nice things about accumulation of work, is that the research you do for one book inevitably will come up later, or you'll pick up something for a book that you don't use in that book, and then you save that piece of information and it comes up and is useful later.
Yeah, there's a question I wanted to ask you guys. It's something I've been thinking about, and it has to do with sort of the status quo. It's this quote, and I forgot who said it. The person who I attributed it to took it from someone else, and the person I took it from was a rapper named Boots Riley from a group called The Coup. But that's not important.
This story is getting very long.
It is. He said that if you're not writing about, he said everything is about social issues. If you're not writing, if your music, if your art's not about social issues, then you're just accepting the status quo. What do you think about that? Because it's something I agree with it, but I also wrestle with it a little bit.
I'm going to go back on kind of my previous answer. I think you need to acknowledge it and recognize the social issues. I don't think the work has to be completely about social issues, where you turn off readers and then you lose people, and then you're just screaming into the abyss at some point. And again, I'm not saying that it needs to be escapism, but I think you need to contribute, and you need to acknowledge and put that out there. And also thank you, Ed, for recommending Atmosphere to me as a rap group. That I've got that on my phone. Unfortunately, I started playing on my computer when my daughter was doing homework, and she learned some new words from that my wife is not happy about. So we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Then don't let her listen to The Coup, at least, make sure you Liz?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not sure I necessarily agree that if you're not writing about it with every book that you are accepting. I mean, I think that there is a place, everyone needs a break from the challenges they face in their life, the things that they see around them, and there's nothing wrong with escapist fiction. That said, that's not really what I want to write. I want to entertain people. I am writing commercial fiction, and so I have to put a focus on plot and story and character. And so when I talk about social issues, I think it really has to tie into the plot, whatever I'm writing about, and it has to tie into the themes that I'm writing about. Or if I put too much focus on it, then it's going to be a distraction. It's not going to feel like it fits in the book, and it's not going to resonate. But I do think that every book is an opportunity to share information and to educate people on things that they might not know about. I mean, what makes me passionate about writing stories is being able to inform about things that matter to me. So I do write a lot of a lot of female-driven stories. I write a lot of stories that have to do with treatment of women and violence against women. And the book I'm writing right now that's set in Detroit, there's also a lot to do with racism, because that's really important to me too, and that fits in that book. So I think every book is going to have a different level of focus on social issues, and the nuances are necessarily going to be different, and you don't want to be writing the same book every time. But I think it matters that we show these things, and it matters that these things aren't invisible in our stories. And so, I mean, all of my books in some way are going to deal with social issues, and that's, I don't see that ever changing.
Thanks.
Here we go. Hi. Thank you so much. Usually I'm a lot more graceful with the Zoom, the technology. Thank you all so much for your really thoughtful responses and thoughtful discussion. We've had a lot of viewers in and out over the course of this event, so clearly you all have a great draw individually and as a trio. I think that you should start a comedy show as well, just on the side as a side hustle. And I would like to wrap it up for now. If you have any last words you'd like to say to our audience, now would be the time.
Yeah, let me start because I don't want to forget to say this. Thank you so much to Liz and JJ for joining me for this event. I really appreciate that. I really, really, really want to tell anybody who's listening now or listening later, after you sign off after this event, please, please, please go to Lost Cities Books website and buy books. We absolutely need to support our local bookstores, especially in the DC region. We have such a great, great, great group of indie bookstores, and we can't lose any of them. We know the pandemic's been tough on business, and we want to make sure that, I mean, for writers and for readers, especially even maybe more so as readers, I know we're all indebted to independent bookstores. So please go to their website right after this and buy a book, at least one book for them. It could be, it should be one of ours, but if not, that's fine. Just buy something.
Yeah, and you can find any of us online, to follow us online as well. Google any of us, our names, and then the word author, and it will probably come up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever. Or
bombing federal building and Liz.
Yeah, or Liz will be on a watch list. If you do Google Ed, don't hit Google Images. Who knows what'll come up there?
Or do.
But yeah, Google us, follow us on social media. If you read our books, please tell people about them. Spread the word, because we can't get out and do live events like we normally would. I know I at one point I had done 40, 50 events over a 16-month period, and I think I did a total of 0 this year. So it's hard on all of us. So please support your local bookstores, support your authors, and thanks everybody for watching tonight.
Yeah, I'll just echo what's been said. Thank you, Ed, for inviting us, and Shady for having us here today, and Lost City Books for hosting this event. We appreciate you guys taking the time to host the event, and to everyone for watching.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And just a reminder to our viewers that you can find They're Gone on the shelf now at Lost City Books, so you can just pop on in. Although they're running out, they're about to be gone, as it were.
Hey, that's one for the comedy routine.
Thank you all so much for joining us, and everyone have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.